Shalom, my friends. Shalom uvracha. This is your old pal, Rabbi Sol Solomon, delighted and thrilled to be with you. Now, you know, just like Dave, I love radio and I love music too. Those two things together. Well, if you're talking about those two things, you cannot go wrong talking to our guest today in the neighborhood. This man, maybe, perhaps, the first thing you might remember him from is having a show on the radio called The Lost Lennon Tapes, because he was friends with John and Yoko. He represented them for a while, sort of off the cuff, and he had all these tapes and all these things of Lennon that he created a radio show out of. But he's done so much more on the radio. He's interviewed so many people. He was on LA television doing this, and now he's got one of the most wonderful websites you've ever seen of an archive. It's ELLIOT MINTZ, and his website, ELLIOTMINTZ.com. He's going to tell you all about it and what you can partake of there. But right now, we are partaking of this nice Jewish boy, Elliott Mintz. Shalom, Elliott.
Shalom, Rabbi. It's a pleasure to talk with you, and I only wonder where you get your energy.
Please, it's just, you know where it comes? It comes from Hashem. Where else would it come from? This, of course, is where it comes from. Yes.
Where else would it come from? Yes, indeed.
Now, how have you been enjoying the Jewish holidays? Do you celebrate any of that at all at this point, or you're more spiritual, or what?
I celebrate them. I celebrate them more probably in a spiritual way than in an Orthodox way. Although this particular Yom Kippur, I participated in a very traditional Yom Kippur dinner with three of my closest friends. And it was, food-wise, it was according to biblical law. We didn't do the prayer recitations that I used to do with my father as a child growing up. But so there was certainly the religious component to the High Holy Days, and throughout the rest of the days of the year, I like to think of myself as a spiritual person who sometimes falls shy of the rituals.
That sounds, I fall far shy of everything, but even the rituals I do, I move on. You can't look back, you gotta go forward. Although, I do want to look back a little bit, because the producer, the host of this program, Dave, lost his father a couple of months ago. So I'm kind of curious, It just occurs to me to ask you, what is your fondest memory of your papa?
A question I've never been asked before. Let me just reflect on that for a second, of my fondest singular memory. You know, like so many things in life that are so impactful, like a son's relationship to a parent, everything seems to immediately go by like a quick-moving slideshow. So it's difficult for me to pull one out of the air. But there is a composite picture of my father that runs through my mind right now, of him smiling. He would never end a conversation without telling a joke. He loved to laugh, and although he was a sober, intelligent man with many versatile interests, he once said to me, "Elliott, you know the thing that you should do that you don't do enough of?" And this was an unusual question for my dad to ask me. He was a very permissive father. And I said, "No, Pop, what do you recommend?" And he said, "You should laugh more. There should be more laughter in your life." So as you asked that question, I just closed my eyes here for a moment. I saw my dad with that smiling face that he always had.
Wow, I'm very glad I asked that. But were you able to take that to heart? Have you had lots of laughs in your life, and are you able to go there, or are you more a serious, down in the dumps kind of person like me?
No, I am not a down in the dumps kind of person. That I am not. I'm not demonstratively, outwardly a humorous person. I don't tell jokes well. And people don't see me laughing a whole lot. Unlike my dad and others that I know, you see the joy, just when you shake hands with them and say, I haven't seen you in a while, and they just kind of light up. With me, I think most of my expressions are more internal. I'm a little bit more introverted than extroverted. So the last time that I just rolled on the floor laughing about either a joke or a circumstance or a situation, no, I can't recall one of those in a number of years. So I think some people are just, that expression, they wear their heart on their sleeve.
Of course, I do it with my liver, but yes.
That's an example. Yeah, you're a more I can just tell in the first few minutes of speaking with you that you are a more revelatory and celebratory man
Oh yes,
than me.
I like
you.
to. Well, I appreciate that thought, and I appreciate your sharing these kind of personal things about yourself. Especially, I have to ask, you express yourself in a very particular way. Were you on like debate teams when you were in high school?
No.
I have you rolling on the
no.
floor now. No, because you have this cadence. You should be on public television. Well, you didn't have to be. You had a great career without it. But it's just like someone who can get up there in this measured way, speaking full sentences with commas in the middle of them all over the place. How do you do it?
I'll tell you, Rabbi. As a teenager, I had a terrible stutter. I had a real speech issue. I wouldn't be able to get through a sentence without sounding like that, literally. I'm not making fun of people who stutter. It's a really serious situation. I developed it for some unknown reason when I was 16, and it stayed with me for a few years. It was ironic that I would wind up in Los Angeles when I was around 18, attending broadcasting classes at LA City College. And I walked into the class on the first day with a very heavy New York accent. I'd never left New York before. I'd been in LA. And a partial stutter. And I told the instructor, so look, I want to go to be a person who talks to people on the radio. I mean, it almost sounds like a Saturday Night Live skit, but it was through speech therapy classes and speech therapy exercises, and laying on my back with a 20-pound typewriter on my solar plexus to do breathing exercises, to learn how to slow down my speech pattern. And as a result of the training and getting past the speech impediment, I wound up with the whatever accent or however I sound. People tend to think that I sound more Canadian than anything. And in those days, in the early FM radio days, the training was for you not to sound different, but for you to sound like everybody else on the radio. The FM DJ, they all sounded alike, if you can think back at whoever you listened to late in the evening. So it just hung around. I don't try deliberately to talk slowly or to purposely enunciate. It just came out of maybe an overdose reversal drive of something that as a child had verbally imprisoned me.
Wow. By the way, I tried to sound like Nemeth. Did not work. Did not. And you know who Nemeth is because you're a radio guy. But this is the thing that shocked me, because now we think of you as a publicist, publicist to the stars and doing all that. But you were not just in FM radio and not just radio, but underground. That very phrase has a certain romance for music lovers and radio lovers of a general. Tell us about life in underground radio, just some memories that come to you.
Underground radio that emerged out of the 1960s, created by a man named Tom Donahue, who did a radio show in San Francisco, later became the program director, and introduced a format that would sound different than everybody else who was on the radio. How did it sound different? Well, if you were a DJ in the old days, you played 1, 2, 3 songs, sometimes from a playlist, what you were told to play on the radio, or the most popular songs that people were listening to. You would play singles off of them. You would introduce the next song, you would do the commercial, you come back. What Tom Donahue did was he said, do anything you want. Mix together songs and sounds from a variety of musical sources. If you want to come out of a Grateful Dead tune and segue into an Indian raga for a couple of minutes, do that. Put 4 or 5 of them together, hold the commercials, so you just do a block of them so people go uninterrupted. Talk if you want. Take phone calls on the air from listeners if you want. Be real. Don't try to sound like a disc jockey. Just try to sound like a friend. This was quite revolutionary in the 60s, and because radio was so regimented at the time. That was the birth of what was referred to then as underground radio. It was just an alternative to the traditional sound that you heard.
So it wasn't like pirate radio where you were 100 miles off the coast of California. You were on an FM band, maybe on a college dial, but but it was a different kind of radio than certainly what you were on AM.
Oh yeah, it was the style of broadcasting, not the location. I did shows on I think 6 or 7 different radio stations before I was syndicated around the country. And as I went from station to station to station, I just did what Elliott Mintz used to do on the radio. I talked to people, but not in 5-minute sound bites. I would talk with them for however long the conversation had life, which could mean a half hour or 45 minutes or more. We didn't set up ground rules about what we could talk about, what we couldn't talk about. I didn't welcome guests who were just there to plug a book or a record or on a promotional tour. It was to have conversations like you have in the living room, but to share them with an audience. So I took that style with me in my suitcase from station to station to station.
And how did then you grow that career to eventually being on TV as an entertainment reporter out in Los Angeles? And instead of just staying in radio, you branched out in a way.
Well, one of the stations along the media highway that I appeared on doing a talk show was KABC Radio in Los Angeles, owned at the time by, the ABC networks. I believe that they're now all owned by Disney. I'm not sure. But I was doing a talk show 5 nights a week, basically, interviewing the guests the way I always did, taking phone calls from listeners, sometimes no guests, just talking to listeners. And, it developed some degree of popularity. So the ABC broadcasting company said, look, if this guy is talking to Mick Jagger or whoever it is on the radio, what we should do is put him on Eyewitness News on the TV show, doing the same kind of things. And maybe he would appeal to a younger audience, and maybe he would have access to some of these people who, were not terribly comfortable just talking to another guy in a suit. So I just became the entertainment correspondent for Eyewitness News while doing the radio show at the same time. I think that went on for a year or two. It was a lot of work. I was spending more time on the air than off the air.
Wow. I'm a little bit jealous on this, but wow. Let me ask you, Elliott Mintz. We know, and we will certainly get to your special relationship with John and Yoko, but I'm curious, what is one or two of the worst interviews that you ever had?
Well, I never tell tales at school, so I won't give you a name, but there was a person around, I think in the 1970s, who was a really, really, really great artist. And he had a number of hits. I loved his music. I loved his songs. And, I was in touch with his publicist. I don't know how it exactly took place, but it was agreed that I was going to meet with him and we were going to sit down and we were going to tape an interview that I would later play on the air. And I remember him coming to my house in Laurel Canyon where we would conduct the interview. And he perfectly charming guy, nice guy, came in, shook hands. We talked for a few minutes. I set up a tape recorder. I asked my first question. And this experience from doing what you do, you kind of get an idea in the first 5 minutes, sometimes earlier, of which direction the train is heading. And I knew that either this guy did not like to be interviewed, did not like to be on the radio, was in a bad mood, or whatever the case was. But I tried all the techniques that one tries to make somebody feel comfortable, to bring them out of their shell, to give them the space to talk about the things they want to speak about. It went nowhere. After about 30 minutes, I thanked him very much for his time. He seemed relieved that it was over, and it was a terrible interview. Then there is one that I can mention because I've said this publicly before. I was a tremendous fan of Salvador Dali. And Dali is generally regarded as one of the great artists of the 20th century, certainly the father of surrealism, surrealistic art. Everybody knows the name Dali. And I was fortunate enough to get an interview with Mr. Dali. And I went to his hotel in New York in the afternoon with my tape recorder. And I might mention, just for purposes of reference, John and Yoko came along with me. I told them the night before we were having a dinner, they wanted to know who I was going to be talking to the next day. And I said, Dali. And they both said, oh, we met him years ago. And Yoko, of course, was very active in the avant-garde art world. And it'd be nice to see him again. So why don't you come by and pick us up and we'll all go to the hotel together. Well, I knew that this is going to be somewhat problematic, but kind of difficult to say no to the two of them. I picked them up. We went to the hotel. Of course, Dali was delighted that they were there. They were delighted to see him. And I set the tape recorder and I began to talk to Dali. And with all due respect, he had a very, very heavy Spanish accent. He wasn't that easy to understand. He was somebody who monopolized the microphone and monopolized the room. And as I was trying to ask him the pertinent questions, from time to time, off mic, John or Yoko would be heard making a comment themselves or asking him a question as if it was a conversation. And the interview got completely away from me. It's posted, by the way, on my website. I run the thing, as it turned out, and I acknowledge on the website, whereas I have great respect for him. And this is not to cast shade on anyone. It was one of the worst interviews I ever conducted. I regretted that one miserably. So those are two that come to mind.
Well, I'm glad you do, because it doesn't sound like he was a jerk. He was just kind of being pulled. He's a vociferous kind of guy, and he's got other friends there, and he wasn't. At least he wasn't nasty and even the other guy whose name you will not mention. Although are the initials VM by any chance? No, I'm
not going to tell.
Just checking. Because we have interviewed other radio people, and there's certain names that come up again and again in terms of the worst people I've ever spoken to, and usually the stories are not as nice as at least even the two people that you mention were nice, at least going into the interview, even if they didn't do a particularly good interview. So that's good. I'm sorry. Yes, please.
They were both the unknown guest and Salvador Dali. They couldn't have been nicer. I mean, Dali made me feel at home. His wife Gala was there as well. He took a book, a Dali art book, and autographed it for me, and then turned the page to draw a doodle for me on the page of his book, which is in a safe deposit box somewhere under safekeeping. I mean, he really made me feel at home. He was staying in a hotel, a beautiful hotel suite, and so no, he was well. Go to ELLIOTMINTZ.com, go to radio interviews, click on Salvador Dali, and you'll hear him. He was wild. He was you can't create the kind of art he created without traveling down a path that most of us have never visited. So, upon reflection, I would have loved to have just shared the couple of hours that we were all together more than having him as a guest on the radio. I just regretted that it was a missed opportunity. Maybe if I was with him alone and we had a little bit more time for him to just relax a little, something may have emerged from it. But his personality was larger than a microphone.
Well, good or bad, though, you posted it on your site, and it's history, and it's of value just the way it is. In some ways, more valuable as a peek into him and John and Yoko and you at a certain point in time. At the time, oh, there's a terrible interview, but 40, 50 years on, it's like, well, no, this is where we were, and these are crazy artistic people. This is what an interview with crazy people should sound like. As opposed to, I'll ask a question, you be mildly interesting, and then I'll ask another question, and you still be mildly interesting. In some ways, sometimes it's important to have a conversation like that too, I believe. But I want to remind people, I want to tell people that when we say Elliot Mintz, we want to get this right. It's ELLIOTMINTZ. It's not like a search. There's a Z on the end of the thing. ELLIOTMINTZ.com. And you really dig it up nice. You've got like a thing where you put like a jukebox, and it isn't just here's a name, click on it, don't click on that, click on this. You really have to kind of play with it a little bit and have fun with the site. And in that old time way, find it on the jukebox and play all these interviews. Let me ask you, besides John and Yoko, what are one or two of the very best, most favorite interviews that you've ever done?
And just one final word to add about the website. It's free.
Oh yes,
it's free. There's no charge. There's no bait and click kind of thing. There are no advertisements. It's I created and put it up there because I felt I had been fortunate enough to meet. I interviewed more than 2,000 people in my broadcast career. I ran tape or saved tape or was able to restore tape for about 100 or so, 150, I think, and put them up on the jukebox. And I just wanted to share it. I'm an archivist at heart. I think if you listen to, it's a little bit offbeat. Name might not be immediately familiar. Michelle Phillips. She was along with Cass Elliott. She was in the Mamas and the Papas. She came by to KABC one night, and we had a conversation that I posted that I felt was real and true and intimate, thought-provoking. I like that one a lot. I did a series of interviews with Baba Ram Das, who was somebody who has had a tremendous, profound spiritual impact upon my life and millions of others. And I interviewed him on a few occasions. Talking with Ram Dass, highly memorable. A few of those appear on the website. I liked those two very much. I enjoyed the one with Alan Watts. And again, when I reflect upon all those hundreds of people who were kind enough to, avail themselves of their very valuable time. None of them were paid to be on my radio show. And in the early days, there was a limited audience. Very few people, comparatively, knew who I was, or, they could have been in other locations for an hour or two of their lives, but they shared them with me. So, look, I'm just grateful. And from time to time, I hear from people who are moved by somebody on the website that I haven't even thought about or reflected about in a long time. Or people who are old fans of David Cassidy. And certainly, the interviews that I did with John and Yoko were incredibly memorable. And people were intrigued by a conversation with Bob Dylan, primarily because he is not a frequent guest on radio and television. and is more reclusive than out there. And I think, he was just very down to earth and very real with me. So 99% of the people that I spoke with, and I think it's fair to say 99% of the people in my life that I've met, I've enjoyed their company. I would do it again.
Wow.
I would love to do it again.
Well, it went down 1% talking to me, but I hope you'll interview some other people who'll bring it back up closer to 100. Let me ask you though, the one thing that disturbs me a little bit, that makes me sad, is you mentioned that you posted about 150 of your favorite, of the most interesting interviews on ElliottMinTZ.com, and yet you have done about 2,000 in your career. Are you still archiving? Are you still every once in a while popping up a dozen, half a dozen more of these things that I assume you have in your basement somewhere, or tapes somewhere?
Well, that is the problem, Rabbi. That back in the day, when I was doing this work and when people were on the air, archiving things it wasn't that common an experience as it is today. When people do podcasts and, archive all the people they've interviewed and people just click on it. In those days, for television purposes, videotape was very expensive, very thick, very heavy. I did a television show when I was in my late 20s, I think, and about 100 episodes with a lot of these people on the little TV show. And after the show was reached its end, the advertiser just, quote, recycled all the tapes.
Yeah.
Videotapes at that time cost hundreds of dollars, and they just sent them to a place in the valley that took a big magnet and cleaned them off, sent them back to the advertiser for the next shows that they were going to produce. This is true of the motion picture industry, of the television industry. Some of your favorite TV shows were never archived. Some of your favorite movies were allowed to deteriorate. So A, it wasn't common. B, I had to buy the tape. It wasn't as if the radio stations automatically, when I began doing that stuff, I think I made $68 a week, and stations were barely surviving on limited advertising. It was a different world. And there was a little store in the neighborhood in LA where I lived that, among other things, sold recycled tape recorders, microphones, and audio tape, where for 59 cents or 89 cents, you could buy a 1 hour reel of 1/4-inch tape. And when I had a little extra money, I would buy 10 reels. And when I would go to the radio station, I would just say to the engineer, would you mind just running an air check, a copy of what we're doing on this tape? They did. I would take the tapes home. But over decades, I would just take the tapes, put them in cartons. The cartons would be put somewhere in storage. So prior to the website, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tapes that, of course, needed to be restored, digitalized, edited, commercials taken out, phone numbers taken out. I would put some tapes on a reel-to-reel tape recorder with an engineer, and the tape would just start stretching. Some deteriorated over time. So from time to time, I do put stuff on my YouTube channel for people to explore, because the website moves very slowly for some people. On my YouTube channel, it is indexed. You can pick and choose who you want. And yes, there are more in the vault somewhere, but the business of making them available is extremely time consuming, very expensive, and I'm trying to live in the present. So all those tapes have been designated to go to the proper sources after I leave this plane, and they will hopefully be made more readily available. But it's just not something that I can handle. That website took me 2 years, I think, to build, and I'd be embarrassed to tell you how much money I spent on it. So it was just different then.
I get it. Although I am very happy to hear that you may, I don't know if it's with a university or the Paley Center or wherever you decided to leave your, when, and God willing you live another 20, 30 years, but I'm just saying, at least you've made provisions that, who knows, there's a piece of gold in there that nobody's been able to hear, and yet they will a few years from now, God willing. Let me ask you also, Elliott, so many other things. Let's talk a little bit about the Lennon Onos, or the Ono Lennons, however we want to put them. Do you have
Hmm.
one or two absolute favorite moments of hanging with them?
The best moments with John and Yoko over the years, and I knew them from 71 through 80. My first conversation with John took place a day after he turned 31 years old, and it took place over the radio. It's on the jukebox, and you could just Google Elliott Mintz talks to John Lennon. So we meet publicly in 71 on the radio, and then when they came to California, a number of months later, we meet in person. And from that point on to the end of his life, John and I, we spoke hundreds and hundreds of times together on the phone. I traveled with them, visit them in New York for Christmases and Thanksgivings and New Year's. I would attend their birthday parties for Sean. The two of them came to my house on my 31st birthday to visit with me. It, uh, it was an odyssey that included, it was a significant part of my entire life. Favorite moments were the quiet moments. Whenever I would visit them at the Dakota, at the end of the dinner, or if we went someplace, or whatever it was, we would wind up in their bedroom before they would go to sleep. And they would put on their dressing gowns, get under the covers. There was a white wicker chair to the right of the bed, and I would sit there, and that was the place we liked to talk. Sometimes the kitchen, rarely the living room, primarily the old bedroom, where we would talk for hours. Frequently, as we're talking, Yoko would fall asleep. She heard it all before. But John and I would continue to the early hours until it was time for him to go to sleep and time for me to walk back to my hotel, which I like to do in the brisk early morning air. Those were the best moments. There were no microphones, there was no TV cameras. They were private moments. We talked about everything under the sun. It wasn't, it never felt like I was talking to the man who founded the Beatles. We rarely talked about that subject. We talked about all the things that good friends, casual friends, talk about. John was an incredibly articulate, opinionated man who had thoughts about everything, was not afraid to express them. And, we had established somehow a trust. I think that they basically knew that I was a guy who could keep his mouth shut, that they could say something to me and not read about it in the newspaper the next day. That when it was time to do interviews with them, which I did, I would say to John, well, it's time, to turn the clock back and we're going to do the Beatle trip again. He understood, and we did those. But when we were not on the air, they were always memorable and provocative and sometimes controversial. He and I felt differently about a lot of subjects too. So he was somebody who loved the art of debate. I'm a non-confrontational guy. If somebody has an opinion that's different than mine, I usually say, well, bless you, you're entitled to that opinion, and I'm not going to try to dissuade you. If John didn't like something, he was going to let everybody in the world know about it.
Let me ask you, in terms of non-confrontational, it occurs to me now, since you were friends with both of them, you were friends with John and Yoko as a couple, as a pair. Was it when he had that lost weekend? How did you deal with that? It's like when people are friends of a couple and then the couple divorce, and they have to choose side, like which one you're going to be friends with, and it gets weird. Was it ever weird for a year or two or three?
No, because A, they weren't divorced, they just were separated. They they agreed to spend some time apart. It was Yoko's idea. She thought it would be best for John to spend a little time. She had once remarked publicly that John spent his entire life married. He married very, very young and had a son with his first wife, son Julian. And shortly after that relationship came to an end, he married Yoko. And he did not have a number of years by himself pre the time that they had their separation. And she said, "You should go off to Los Angeles. You should go there and, you know, do whatever you feel like doing." There was a kind of restlessness that she sensed about him and some space that she felt that she needed. And she called me and told me that that was the decision and that John was going to be arriving at such and such time. Would I go to the airport and pick him up? And please look after him. Do the best you can. And, you know, I told both of them from the very beginning, look, I love you both. I am not going to take sides. Whatever is going on between the two of you is private, but I'm not going to keep secrets from either of you. So anything you tell me, just know that I still look at the two of you as John and Yoko. And there were no secrets. And from time to time, John would say, you know, what is she doing and how is she feeling? And could you tell her this? And, you know, I was kind of like a carrier pigeon in terms of the exchanges. It felt uncomfortable for me to be in the company with just one of them. It felt like something was missing. An appendage to the experience was invisible. So, and, you know, I longed for the union because I felt that the two of them were, you know, a dyadic couple, that they were very much connected. So there was that sadness, but in terms of favoring one over another, that would have been impossible. If that was the admonition, it never was. But if either of them said, "Look, as long as you're friends with the other one, you can't be my friend. So make a choice." Well, my choice would have been not to be friends with either of them.
Well, speaking of that as well, are you still in touch with Yoko? We've heard that she's not been well. How is she doing? How often are you in touch?
Well, the last time I saw her was just at the beginning of COVID. It wasn't this past February, it was the previous February. And Sean threw a little birthday gathering for her at a very nice new Japanese restaurant in Lower Manhattan. And I flew to New York for that event. I'm born on February 16th. Yoko was born on February 18th. We're both Aquarians, and we have mutually celebrated birthdays. So I got to New York and I spent February 16th, as I usually do, with Sean Ono Lennon and his girlfriend, Charlotte, and rest up a day after that experience, and then went off to see Yoko. So that's when I last saw her, spoke with her, shared in the dinner and the birthday cake and the celebrations. And then COVID appeared on the scene virtually the same month. So I have not been with her since, but Sean and I are in frequent contact with each other. Probably the last time was 2 or 3 weeks ago. And he is very, very much with his mom, very present. They have dinners 2, 3 times a week. He is the ever present, dutiful, loving son that he's always been. And for now, for this particular time, that will be the physical connection, the in-person connection with Yoko. But I close my eyes, I blink, and I see her sitting in my living room, or I see myself back in the wicker chair. Yoko's 87 years old now, and all that I can tell you is that the amount of love that she receives from people who inquire about her and send emails and texts and all the rest of it, all of that energy she takes in. So maybe she's not as responsive, in terms of replies, and doing interviews and that kind of thing. But Rabbi, we'll see how responsive we are when we're 87 years old.
Oh, me, please. I feel like a 97-year-old most of the time, let me tell you. Now, let me ask you, though, when I look at your Facebook page and your postings, it's like you're living the life of a 20-year-old. Every day, I was at this party, I was at this gala, this big dinner, and does that get stale, or do you just love it? You love hobnobbing with the celebrities and rubber chicken dinners and whatever it is. I mean, is that just your element? Do you love that?
No. I came of age at a time where I never missed the party. I was there, and I had it. I'm basically a fairly reclusive person. I spend most of my evenings at home, sometimes by myself during the COVID crisis, and sometimes with one or two friends. When I have friends who are not public figures visit with me, or we go out for a dinner, I don't put them up on social media. Nobody knows who they are, and the person that I'm having a meal with, many times they live private lives. They don't want their picture taken. They don't want to be identified. They tend to be private. So what you see on Facebook is not necessarily representative of a typical day. Last night or the night before, I believe, the Hilton family, Kathy Hilton, Rick Hilton, Paris, and Nikki Hilton, they had a marvelous benefit in Los Angeles it's a fundraiser for Children's Hospital in LA, and everybody who attended had to bring an unwrapped toy to gift to a child, and it was called Christmas in September. And they had an auction of things that belonged to them. Thousands and thousands of dollars were raised. It was a big to-do. It was definitely a crowded social situation. I posted pictures of the event simply to make people aware of Children's Hospital LA. And it's just the nature of social media that some eye candy is required. You have to put something there to get people's attention. And when it comes to attention getting, Paris Hilton and her family are experts in getting people's attention. And in this case, once they got it, they transmuted that into something that I considered almost sacred. Do I have fun when I go to those things? I do, because these are people who I've had relationships with. I love the idea of giving back through charities and foundations. That part is joyous. I don't go to any so-called Hollywood parties that are just meaningless. I don't go to movie premieres, stuff like that. There has to be some kind of higher purpose to the attention. But my preference is being at home in front of the fireplace with somebody I love.
Well, you're invited to my sukkah, by the way. I wanted to let you know. It's if you're looking for higher purpose, nothing higher than my sukkah. Let me so. But by the way, speaking of friends, and I don't want to delve too deeply. I can tell you're a private person, but has there been a love of your life? Is there someone, a partner type person in your world?
Well, whereas I tend to keep my private life private, I am surrounded by love, and there are a few women throughout my life and in the present that have gifted me with the joy of just being together. I'm having dinner with one of them tomorrow night, a lady who I've known for more than a decade, who puts a big smile on my face. And the women who I date and the women who I have private relationships with are 100% non-public people. They're people who live private lives doing what they do. For the most part, they're professionals. And it is not as if I'm not surrounded by romance. I'm gifted that way. I'm not alone. So although I'm not married, haven't been married, there have been a few that I've had long-term personal relationships with, and they are still in my life, if not living under the same roof.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that because you seem like such a nice, gentle, decent person. I'm so glad that you are surrounded by people who radiate that back at you. Are you still doing PR? Are you still representing like Paris Jackson and Hilton, or were you a PR person? Now you're retired, but you still hang with the crowd when sometimes.
No, I am, in fact, a media consultant, and I still represent the Lennon estate, and that has been ongoing since 1980, when Yoko asked me to speak on behalf of the matters concerning the Lennon estate. That continues. I occasionally have, as a media consultant, there are some people who retain me for brief periods of time to help them through a media crisis, let's say, or an issue of some sort, or a corporation that is looking for a way to be involved in philanthropy and the best way for them to, position themselves. And of course, for the past 2.5 years or so, I've had the honor of representing Paris Jackson, who I absolutely adore. I adore the music that she makes, and I just enjoy her as a friend. I would think since COVID, Paris has been at my home as much or more than any single person.
Wow.
And I learned from her. She's 23 years old, but you wouldn't know that. She is an incredibly well-read, sophisticated young lady. The first time she walked into my house and gravitated to the library, her cross references, especially in the area of spiritual subjects, was astounding to me. I mean, a kind of brilliance that I don't know if you would say one would not expect. But keep in mind, Rabbi, with everything that we say about kids today, or people in their 20s, or people of limited attention spans, and the appearance of being vapid, and all the rest of it, today's generation of children have access to more information than any generation that preceded them. And for those who elect to use the electronic tools in a constructive manner, they can be the most educated and most sophisticated and advanced people that the earth has ever seen. Some of them don't share that aspect of their lives and rather, talk somewhat superficially or be involved in the selling of things. But if you pierce the veil, you'd be astounded what they know. And in the case of Paris Jackson, what I learned from her.
Well, may I ask, did you know her dad?
Yes. I didn't know him well. I considered Michael a friend, and I visited with Michael at his home. We went out socially together. I think that there's some Facebook photos of us leaving a Broadway show. We went to a James Brown concert in Los Angeles. He loved James Brown. We spent an afternoon, a Father's Day afternoon, taking a very young Sean to the LA Zoo, and I would go to screenings at his house. We would speak. Both of us were insomniacs, so late at night he would frequently call, and we would have conversations. He also was a far more reflective and wiser man than may have been perceived. He was an incredibly shy person. So
And I'm assuming that your memories of him, like so many people who have mixed message legacies, if you will, you're like almost completely positive about him, in terms of what you knew about him, your personal experiences with him, as opposed to what we think about him when you hear the name, it automatically on some level will go to something negative. But you don't go there, correct?
Definitely not. There's no reason for me to go there. There was nothing but positivity expressed during our discourses. I don't pretend for a moment to have been a close, intimate friend of his to the degree that I was with a John and Yoko or others, but the time spent with them was incredibly joyous. Now, when I'm with Paris, my thoughts don't go to him. They just don't. When I'm with Sean, we rarely talk about his dad, never talk about the Beatles. We're in the present moment. And frankly, by the way, in the world of celebrity, you mention the name and people can find something negative to say about them. I remember a couple of months ago, it was the occasion of Mother Teresa, now Saint Teresa's birthday. And I just did a little Facebook post about Saint Teresa and the nature of compassion and love. And I heard from a variety of people, including somebody who said, did you see this documentary on her that indicated that she took money from the charity and used them for personal purposes? And if you Google the name Mother Teresa, what will come back at you, among the obvious, will be references that are negative to books and documentaries of people who have a complaint with her. Well, let me tell you something, Rabbi. If anybody has got a complaint with Mother Teresa or Saint Teresa, nobody in show business is going to escape negative criticism. If you want to go there, if you want to look for that or manufacture that, and I just view that, I view those things as vexations to the spirit.
Well, they can be if they're so little, either if they're wrong or if they're so little compared to the rest of the person. But you wouldn't say that about a Harvey Weinstein or a Jeffrey Epstein or things of that nature. I mean, there's a certain point, a tipping point, where however many wonderful movies Weinstein produced, ugh. I mean, you understand that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in the case of the person you just mentioned, there is a person who stood trial, was found guilty of offenses by multiple people. They were deemed to be factual through the legal judicial process. And you, of course, you surrender your participation of interaction with society as a result of such behavior. So there are certainly names that we're familiar with who were found to be complicit of terrible activities. And that's fact. In the Hollywood world, where virtually everything is built on illusion and speculation, people just draw from experiences, bits and pieces, and arrive at conclusions that are not necessarily true, almost always false. Everybody's second profession, in America anyway, is show business. You know, you get in the old days, you hail a cab in New York and you get into the cab and you just left a movie theater and you're looking at the cab driver and the driver says, so what do you think about that film that you just saw? And I said, I thought it was pretty good. I liked it. He said, yeah, it did 200 million at the box office last Friday. You know that? So everybody's second profession is that they're experts on show business, the people in show business, people that they've never met, people who they just read about, hear about. And that is what is referred to as gossip. And in my life, I do make a significant distinction between what is real and what is not real, what's just idle gossip and chatter, and what is legitimate criticism.
Now, see, as a rabbi, I make a big distinction between what is real and what is not Israel. So we're kind of close on that. Wow, no laugh. Not even nothing right there. Oh boy. Oh, that was so
But
quiet from you. So sad. And here I was
but
trying to
is
make.
it also?
What? Sorry.
I did. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to ask you, as a rabbi,
Uh,
when you were confronted by the wrongdoings of people like Harvey Weinstein, the other man you mentioned, Epstein, when you're confronted with behavior that is inherently evil, do you come at it from a specifically opinionated direction, or does compassion and the willingness to let God decide fate predominate your thoughts?
Oh, if you knew me, sir, if you knew me, Elliot, believe me, I am as judgmental. And I make God look like Mister Rogers. If I think somebody's guilty, I'm telling you, oh, Old Testament God got nothing on me. No, I judge, jury, execute. Boom, I'm there. In fact, if you Google my name, Rabbi Sol Solomon, first of all, you get a lot of things people who say I smell bad. Um, um, I won't comment on that. But other than that, but it's just no. I because we're on this planet, and if people are doing wrong, we should call them out on it. And if people are doing right, they should be celebrated and beloved. And if they're doing in the middle, as most people are, celebrate the good and don't cancel the good if they've done the bad. And then that's basically my theory on life, sort of.
When I talk to people who are obviously religious figures and active in whatever the faith might be, I am tempted to ask them, and I do, and I'm about to with you, the following. I'm sure it's not the first time you've heard it. Do you believe that the souls of people who commit evil in on planet Earth during the time that they're alive, do you believe that they go to a different place than people who have spent their lives only doing good?
That is an extraordinary question. I I would like to believe that people who do evil in a big way suffer in a big way in the afterworld. This is what I would like. Do I actually believe it as opposed to poof, we're dust, we go in the ground, and whatever we've done for 60, 80, 120 years when we're here, it was just while we're here and it's gone. Personally, that tends to be where my belief system is. But the other part of me wants to think Hitler is still, he's listening to a lot of Michael Bolton records now, over and over and over and over again, somewhere wherever he is. I would like to believe that, but I don't know.
I think that the last sentence conveys the essence of your belief system, which is that you simply do not know, but you would like to believe. So you wouldn't make a declarative statement that you believe that there's a heaven and a hell, and that Martin Luther King Jr. is in a very different place than Adolf Hitler is in terms of their souls. You don't go that far. It's more conceptual than biblical teaching. Is that a
Absolutely.
fair?
The one thing I do know about religion is that nobody knows anything. With all due respect to Jesus or Baba Ram Dass or Baba
Mhm.
Ram Dass 2.0, any of them, it's just nobody actually knows. Even people who die or they're on the operating table and they're dead and they're going towards the light and then they're pulled back, they were probably dreaming of the light. They don't know. Nobody knows.
Mm-hmm. I hear that,
This is me. This is,
and
you asked. Yeah.
I hear that, and I have no doubt that you and I are going to find out the legitimacy of our speculations.
Hopefully not very soon. Hopefully.
Oh no, no, I'm not planning on it or looking forward to it. Um, but I do, I'm 76 now, so I'd be lying to you if I told you that those thoughts of the end game don't cross my mind. I think it's a condition of our generation. I noticed the other day an advertisement that the Rolling Stones are planning on touring again. They'll be in LA for giant mega stadium concerts. I think Mick Jagger is in his mid-70s now. He had heart issue not too long ago. All the musicians that people of my generation grew up with are people who were in their 70s or beyond. I think Paul McCartney. So you do think about the passing of time. You do think about age, and it does lead you, obviously, I think, to some self-introspection on how much time you got left, what you're going to do with it, and more significantly, to me anyway, what's to follow, if anything. So I ponder those questions, obviously, with greater thought than I did when I was bar mitzvahed.
Well, yeah. No, we don't think about anything when we're bar mitzvah except girls, to be quite honest. But at our age, I'm sorry.
And guilt.
Oh,
bar mitzvah guilt.
Guilt, absolutely. Guilt and guilt, the two things that go together in Judaism so perfectly. Now, before I let you go, let me, first of all, thank you so much for being such an introspective and honest and delightful and so mellifluous guest on this program. I want to guide everybody to the free website, ELLIOTMINTZ.com, ELLIOT, Mintz, MINTZ.com. You can also look up Elliott Mintz on YouTube, because the man, this is more encouragement for you to make the time to bring some of those tapes to digitizers and to run them through to people who won't stretch them to pieces, and maybe they won't crumble so fast. You probably know Steven Spielberg. Bring it to his house. He archives all the Holocaust stuff. He can save your stuff. Yes. Yeah. So, what you do? I knew you would know Spielberg. So, but I'm just saying, do it, because there's going to be maybe only 10 people will be interested in some person that you interviewed in 1981. But of those 10 people, one of them is going to be like an eye-opening, mind-blowing conversation that they've waited to hear all their life that will change the direction of their life. You never know. And this is why I think it's important.
I think about that frequently, because, occasionally I go on YouTube. I was on it the other night, and I saw an old interview that had been done with Carl Jung, and he was talking on this old 16 millimeter film piece about his good friend Sigmund Freud. And I realized that I'm watching this in my kitchen on the laptop, even though the people who we speak about now, their constituency, their followers through this generation, may be fading and thinning out a bit. Who is to say that 100 or 200 years from now, someone will discover Picasso or Bob Dylan for the first time? But somebody who's 14 years old will just be playing around with an old YouTube thing, or stumble upon a website with a conversation that we almost take for granted today, and it'll be brand new for them, as it was a few nights ago for me, hearing and seeing Carl Jung.
And it's also,
would I have had that up?
Yeah, it's also the patina of age. It's like watching, it doesn't even have to be a good movie about New York in the 60s or 70s. Just seeing what New York looked like. It doesn't even matter what the story is, or the acting, the exteriors, the way the cars look, the feel of the film stock is a lesson. It's a memory, it's history, if you know what I'm saying.
As a matter of fact, I do subscribe or am attached to a website. I forgot the exact name. It could have been called Old New York. And it's done by somebody who takes these old archival videos from New York at the turn of the century and has been able to restore them, colorize them, add sound to them, because they're all shot silently, where you see the horse and buggies going past the tenements, where you see the way people walked and talked and dressed, where you see not only the evolution of New York as a city, but of the people and the country. I find it totally engrossing. That stuff grabs me frequently more than going to see a contemporary feature film. So that old expression that everything old is new again has great value, and it's history that comes alive. And I know that I'm not the only one. I know that stuff is shared by millions. It doesn't get the razzle dazzle hit. It's not something that people talk about, but people Google around for restored videos of old New York City. It feels like you're in a time machine.
Well, it has been a delight and an honor for us here in the neighborhood to go into the time machine with you, Elliott Mintz. Of course, you are still doing what you do, which is so important, but also all those years of sharing what you did before, mixing those together. Everybody go to ElliotMintz.com. Elliott, it remains for me to thank you so much, to wish you good health, good success, lots more lovely women in your life. That sounds like a very good thing. Mazel tov on that. And good spirituality, and keep digging into the nature of why we're here. But I know that I was here to talk to you today, and that has made my week. Thank you, Elliott Mintz.
Bless you. Thank you. Good night.
Shalom to you.